All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a literal medical mystery, one that actually forced scientists to look way beyond the traditional pharmacy shelf and straight into the natural world. For decades, a huge portion of patients suffering from severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, have essentially been left behind by modern medicine. But back in 2006, a team of researchers asked a seriously daring question. What if a highly controversial, heavily stigmatized compound actually held the key to relief? 40 to 60%. Let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering failure rate for standard treatments in patients battling OCD. Imagine your daily life being completely dictated by this condition. You finally build up the courage to seek help, and you're told that the very best available medicines out there simply aren't going to work for you. Honestly, that's the heartbreaking reality for nearly half of all the people who seek treatment for OCD today. So, when traditional medicine leaves literally millions of people stranded, you're forced to ask a pretty radical question. Could a psychedelic be the answer? And this is exactly what researchers at the University of Arizona decided to investigate. Now, there had been anecdotal reports for a while, whispers in the medical community and case studies of individuals who felt profound relief from their OCD symptoms after consuming psychedelic compounds. But as we all know, anecdotes aren't science. The researchers really needed to put this to the test in a rigorous, completely controlled environment. Section 1. The heavy burden of OCD. Before we get into the experiment, we have to look at what this disease actually does to the people living with it every single day. Because OCD isn't just some quirky personality trait or, a preference for a super tidy desk. It's a chronic, profoundly debilitating condition. With a lifetime prevalence of around 2 to 3%, it's actually the fourth most common psychiatric diagnosis. People suffer from these incredibly distressing, intrusive thoughts, and they feel totally compelled to perform exhausting rituals just to cope. And even when standard medications, like SSRIs, which are typical antidepressants, even when they do work, they usually only drop symptoms by about 30 to 50%. That leaves so many patients with residual symptoms that completely disrupt their lives. Section 2. An unlikely new treatment. Faced with this locked door of treatment-resistant OCD, researchers turned to an incredibly unconventional key. They looked closely at those anecdotal reports we talked about and decided to investigate a compound that most people probably associate with the 1960s counterculture rather than modern psychiatry. That compound is psilocybin. It's the primary active ingredient found in what are commonly known as magic mushrooms. But look, the researchers definitely weren't interested in magic, they were interested in neurochemistry. You see, psilocybin acts as a potent agonist, which basically means it binds to and actively stimulates serotonin receptors in the brain. That is a massive clue. Psilocybin interacts heavily with the brain's serotonin system, which is the exact same system that standard OCD medications try to target. But psilocybin potentially does it in a much more profound, entirely different way. The really crucial takeaway here is the absolute contrast in the approach. On one hand, you have the standard daily grind of pills. Patients are taking SSRIs every single day, dealing with that 40 to 60% failure rate and a whole host of frustrating side effects. But on the other hand, you have this proposed experimental approach, taking a psychedelic compound, not as a daily pill, but during a few targeted, highly monitored, clinically supervised sessions. It's a total paradigm shift in how we even think about administering psychiatric medication. Section 3. Inside the clinical trial. So let's look at how these researchers transformed a substance known for recreational use into a strict, FDA-approved scientific investigation. Taking a Schedule I psychedelic and giving it to patients with severe anxiety disorders is, frankly, a massive undertaking. The safety protocols had to be completely airtight. This was not a casual setting. It was a highly controlled environment explicitly designed for patient safety and precise monitoring. First, they did intensive outpatient screening. Then the actual dosing took place during an 8-hour controlled session. Patients wore eye shades to direct their attention inward, they listened to a standardized set of music, and they had highly trained clinical sitters with them every single second. Finally, just out of an abundance of caution, they were transferred to a psychiatric inpatient ward overnight for observation. Every single variable was managed. Now, who actually volunteered for this? The trial focused on 9 incredibly brave individuals who were basically acting as proxies for millions. These were patients with officially diagnosed severe OCD who had already failed an average of over 3 different standard medical treatments. They had tried the conventional routes, they had endured the therapies, and they were still suffering. For them, this experimental trial was essentially a beacon of hope.
Section 4. Surprising and promising results.
Over the course of several weeks, the researchers administered up to 4 different doses to these 9 subjects, ranging from very low to high, and they carefully tracked their obsessive and compulsive symptoms. And the data they got back was absolutely wild. The patient's YBOCS scores, which is the standard clinical scale used to measure OCD severity, saw an incredible drop. We're talking about marked decreases in symptoms ranging from 23% to 100% in all subjects during one or more of the testing sessions. Severe obsessions and compulsions dropping dramatically, sometimes vanishing entirely within hours of administration. And what's maybe even more remarkable is that for most of these patients, this profound relief lasted well past the 24-hour mark. It extended far beyond the actual pharmacological high of the drug itself. But obviously, efficacy means nothing if the treatment isn't safe, right? Well, just as importantly, the clinical environment kept everyone completely safe. The treatment was very well tolerated. Only one subject experienced a transient spike in blood pressure, which interestingly wasn't even accompanied by anxiety, and absolutely no other significant adverse physical effects were observed. The rigorous safety protocols worked perfectly, proving that in a controlled medical setting, this compound could be administered safely to vulnerable patients. Beyond the hard clinical data, there was a deeply human element to this study that we can't ignore. 5 of the subjects actually described their experiences as very psychologically and spiritually enriching. 4 subjects even reported profound transcendental experiences. So this shows us that this unconventional treatment didn't just numb their symptoms like a traditional chemical restraint might. It touched them on a profoundly human, perhaps even existential level. Now, in a fascinating twist, the researchers ran into a pretty unique scientific problem. They included a very low dose in the trial, and the intention was for it to act essentially as a placebo, just so they could compare the data against the higher doses. But here's the placebo surprise. Even this very low dose caused a stronger clinical response than anyone expected. Now, while this definitely complicated the researchers' ability to compare the data cleanly, a failed placebo that actually ends up helping patients feel better is a pretty great problem to have, honestly. Section 5. Looking to the future. All right, as we wrap up this explainer, we need to talk about what actually comes next. The results from 2006 were incredibly promising, but in the world of medical science, one study is just the beginning of a very long journey. While these initial sparks of success are super exciting, we do need to ground these findings in scientific reality. This was a very small phase 1 proof of concept study with only 9 people. It was designed primarily just to prove that the drug is safe to give to humans in this specific context. So while the results are highly promising, it is not a widely available cure today. To get something like this into the hands of the general public, it requires much larger, randomized, placebo-controlled trials to verify those initial sparks of success. But honestly, the true legacy of this study is so much bigger than just the data. A door has been unlocked. By keeping an open mind, trusting in rigorous scientific methods, and removing the historical stigma around unconventional compounds, we can actually rethink conventional medicine. We don't have to just accept a 50% failure rate as the absolute best we can do. We can unlock entirely new frontiers in psychiatric medicine. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. If a previously misunderstood compound could hold the key to helping millions of people suffering from debilitating OCD, what else might science discover if we just keep asking the right questions? We absolutely need to keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible in medicine. Share this explainer to support mental health research, keep your mind open, and let's keep solving these mysteries together.